The sun blazed down mercilessly on the valley, each breath thick with the scorched air of the Afghan desert. We'd barely been in country a month, but the heat already felt like an unrelenting adversary. Hydration was critical. As the squad's greenhorn, it had fallen to me to play the nag, constantly reminding the guys to drink water unless they wanted a date with heatstroke. Their responses? Scoffs and jokes, of course, typical. Still, they grudgingly obeyed, gulping down water before their egos could argue otherwise. We were patrolling near a village, maybe a mile from our combat outpost, COP, when the usual routine began. Leadership had drilled hearts and minds into us so much it felt like a mantra. A PFC from Wyoming, always one to think with his gut, fished a candy bar out of his pocket. He smiled as he approached a young girl, no older than 6, and handed it to her. Innocent enough, or so he thought. Before the wrapper crinkled, a local man stormed over, fury etched into every line of his face. His shouts cut through the dry air, his hand swatting my buddy back as if trying to erase the whole interaction. Within seconds, rifles snapped to shoulders, red dot sights locking onto the man. Tension buzzed like static electricity in the squad as we closed in. The man didn't back down, though. His voice rose louder, his anger unyielding. I didn't need a translator to know he was dead set on delivering justice for what he saw as a violation of his world's sacred rules. Then, in a chilling motion, he yanked the girl by her hair, dragging her into a battered hut made of dirt and stone. The candy bar, that harmless peace offering, lay discarded in the sand like some forgotten relic. Slowly, our rifles lowered, but the moment clung to us like the heat. I thought we'd have to drop that guy, Wyoming muttered, his voice tight. Yeah, lucky for him we didn't, another replied, his tone less forgiving. We regrouped, the mood heavier now. This was our first real taste of the cultural minefield we'd been warned about in those painfully long pre-deployment briefings. Next time, eat your own candy, I quipped, punching Wyoming's vest with a playful jab. He chuckled nervously but didn't argue. And then it hit. A deep, gut-punching boom reverberated through the valley, followed by a column of thick smoke clawing at the sky in the distance. Reflexively, we shielded our eyes from the sun's glare, straining to see through the haze. The realization landed hard, twisting my stomach into a knot. Shit. That's Alpha's AO, our platoon sergeant barked, urgency cutting through the dread like a blade. My pulse quickened. Anything on the comms? I asked, but the sergeant was already waving over the radio operator, his hands moving frantically over the controls. Static hissed back at us, an unforgiving void. Damn it, he growled, slamming the receiver down in frustration. The LT was ahead of him, glued to battalion's frequency, his tone sharp as he relayed what little he could. Around us, the village seemed to hold its breath. Locals who had been milling about moments ago vanished, doors slamming shut, windows shrouded. The stillness was unnerving, the kind that meant they knew something we didn't, and whatever it wasn't good. The explosion was a force of nature, rippling through the air and rattling our chests like a thunderclap. The moment the column of smoke clawed its way into the sky, we all knew, it was an IED. The questions hit just as hard as the blast. Were there casualties? How bad was it? I stood alongside a couple of my squad mates, our eyes locked on the horizon, as the villagers crept from their homes like shadows stretching out at dusk. Their voices rose in a mix of alarm and curiosity, speaking in their native tongue. That's when my buddy snapped. He stormed over to the man he'd tangled with earlier, shoving him hard enough to send the guy stumbling. His rifle came up, the barrel pointing straight at the man's chest. You think this is funny? He shouted, his voice a cocktail of rage and fear. The villagers erupted in chaos, some rushing to intervene, tugging at his vest, yelling. He shoved them off like they were paperweights. I didn't even think, I stepped in, grabbing his rifle and yanking it down. What the hell is wrong with you? I spat, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. Before it could escalate, the platoon sergeant stormed over, clamping a hand on my buddy's shoulder and hauling him away. I couldn't hear the chewing out he got, but judging by the PSG's face, it was less of a conversation and more of a reckoning. The tension snapped like a wire stretched too thin. The villagers scattered, women and kids vanishing inside their homes, while the men re-emerged carrying rifles of their own. "Oh, hell no," someone muttered. We moved fast, rifles up, forming a line as the weight of the moment pressed down on us. Then the LT came charging in, his hands raised high, palms out in a universal gesture of stand down, "We're not here to die today." He shouted something, probably apologies, maybe reassurances, frantically trying to pour water on the fire. And just as it looked like the flames might settle, a second explosion tore through the air, followed by a series of smaller, sharper bursts. Rockets. The panic hit like a wave crashing over us. Somewhere behind me, the PSG's voice cut through the din like a whip. "LT, what's the play?" The LT didn't hesitate. "Everyone on me, now," he shouted, his voice cracking like lightning. We swarmed toward him, the entire platoon snapping into action. "Alpha's been hit," he said, urgency dripping from every word. "They're about a mile out. We're the closest. We're moving now. Keep your damn eyes sharp, watch your fire, and let's get our boys out." Hua! The shout erupted from us like a battle cry, not from duty but from instinct. This was it, our job wasn't just fighting our own battles, it was having our brothers' backs. And today, Alpha needed us more than ever. The blast was colossal, so fierce we felt the shockwave ripple through the ground long after the towering plume of smoke clawed at the sky. One thing was clear, it was an IED. But the questions came fast and brutal. Were there injuries? Casualties? Worse? I stood there, frozen for a moment, alongside a few squad mates as villagers crept cautiously from their homes, their murmurs blending into a low, uneasy hum. That's when things took a sharp turn. One of my squad mates, the same guy who handed the candy earlier, stormed over to the man who'd confronted him. He shoved the guy back with the butt of his rifle, rage flaring in his voice. "You think this is some kind of joke?" he yelled, loud enough to scatter the tension into chaos. The villagers panicked, some attempting to drag him away while others shouted in their native tongue. He shook them off, gripping his weapon tighter. I stepped in, yanking his rifle down. "What the hell are you doing?" I snapped, keeping my voice sharp. Before things escalated further, the platoon sergeant intervened, pulling him aside. Whatever was said, I couldn't hear, but the blistering tone cut like a blade. The man backed down, visibly seething. The villagers didn't stick around for explanations. Women and children vanished into their homes, while the men emerged, armed to the teeth with old, battered rifles. "Oh, hell," someone muttered under their breath as we instinctively fell into formation, weapons raised. That's when the LT appeared, sprinting toward the center of the standoff. He threw his hands up, palms facing the villagers, shaking his head in a silent plea for calm. Words flew fast in their language as he gestured, trying to assure them we meant no harm. Tension hung thick in the air, but just as it began to dissipate, a second explosion shattered the fragile peace. The ground shook violently, followed by the deafening roar of several smaller detonations, rockets. Panic took hold. "Alpha's in trouble, deep trouble," someone muttered, their voice laced with dread. The platoon sergeant barked out orders, his voice sharp and commanding. "LT, what's the call?" he shouted, urgency spiking every syllable. "Everyone, on me." "Now," the LT yelled. The entire platoon snapped into action, clustering tightly around him. "Alpha's been hit hard. They're a mile out. We're the closest. Time to move." The PSG's voice cut through the chaos like a razor. "Keep your heads on a swivel, check your shots, and let's bring them back." A chorus of "hua" echoed back. No backup was coming. The rest of the company was locked down with their own battles. Once again, it was our job to be the cavalry. The explosion hit like a freight train, slamming me into a wall before I crumpled to the ground. My head spun as I tried to piece together what had just happened. My vision swam in and out of focus, and my ears were ringing so loud it drowned out the world. Something warm dripped down my face. Blood? Sweat? I couldn't tell. Face down in the dirt, I struggled to move, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. Where was I? What the hell just happened? Rough hands grabbed me, yanking me upright, but my legs gave out, and I crumpled again. The hands returned, hauling me up a second time. Hey! I know that guy. Why is he shouting? His face was frantic, his lips moving, but I couldn't hear a word. Slowly, like a flickering light bulb, my senses started to return. The ringing eased into distant screams, and my vision sharpened just enough to register the chaos around me. Doc! Get the fuck over here. The words snapped me back to reality. Stumbling, I forced myself toward the sound, dropping to my knees beside a soldier. My stomach turned. His legs were gone. A gory mess where they should have been. His face was battered, bloody, and lifeless. My heart sank. Doc! Wake the fuck up, someone bellowed, shaking me hard. I shook myself out of it. Training kicked in, cold and automatic. I quickly assessed the scene. One Kia, legs and pelvis obliterated, face unrecognizable. Two others down. One clutched his face, screaming in agony, the other lay motionless. I rolled to the nearest injured soldier, feeling for a pulse. Weak. His abdomen and legs were peppered with shrapnel, blood pooling around him. I worked fast, packing wounds and wrapping what I could. No need for a tourniquet, thank God for small mercies. The second guy had his arm dangling uselessly, likely dislocated, and his head was a mess of blood and glass shards from the blast. His screams cut through the chaos. I can't see. I can't fucking see. You're fine. Shut the fuck up, you're fine. I barked back, more for myself than him, as I carefully pulled larger glass shards from his face. Miraculously, his eyes were untouched. And that's when I realized, we were under fire. Bullets cracked overhead, the sharp whip of rounds breaking the sound barrier. But I stayed low, my hands steady as adrenaline fueled my focus. Around me, the rest of the squad returned fire, pushing back at the attackers. Contact right. Over there, someone shouted. I glanced up, spotting 3 enemy fighters ducking behind a corner, taking potshots at us. My guys were holding them off, but we were stretched thin. I steadied my patient. Do you need morphine? I asked, hurriedly. No. I just need one fucking eye, Doc, he snarled, shoving me aside and grabbing his rifle. Half his head wrapped in gauze, he staggered to his feet and ran straight into the fight. Then came the moment I dreaded. I turned back to the fatality. The mess of flesh and gear that used to be one of my squad mates. I couldn't even tell who it was at first, but my gut knew. My chest tightened as I stared at what was left of him. He was gone, and there was nothing I could do to change that. Doc! Doc! Get the fuck over here. The shout dragged me out of the abyss. My SL's voice was sharp and commanding. I nodded weakly, grabbing my rifle. I hadn't even fired a shot yet. We carried our fallen brother into a nearby house, placing him down as gently as we could. There wasn't time for grief. We'd come back for him later. Right now, the rest of the platoon needed us, and they were getting hammered. What's the fucking plan? Someone yelled. Shoot the fucking bad guys, another snapped back. No shit. What the fuck are we doing? The PSG's voice cut through the shouting. "The enemies hold up in that building. Get the AT." One of the guys from Bang Bang Squad sprinted up with the launcher strapped to his shoulder. "Where?" he shouted. The PSG pointed, and he nodded. "Backblast area clear," he roared. With a thunderous blast, the anti-tank rocket tore through the air, slamming into the enemy's position. The building erupted in a cloud of smoke, fire, and rubble. Grenades from the M203s followed, ripping through what little was left. The gunfire ceased, the silence almost deafening after the chaos. We moved cautiously toward the destroyed building, sweeping for hostiles. Among the rubble, I saw the bodies. My breath caught, but there was no time to dwell. "Doc, move your ass," my SL shouted. I shook it off, linked up with the squad, and bounded across the street. There was still a fight ahead. A blur of motion cut across my vision, time itself slowing to a crawl. I saw my squad leader, charging ahead, when out of nowhere, a man, clad in what looked like a heavy, bulky vest, dove straight into him. What the hell was that? I blinked. Suicide vest. Before I could process it, another soldier grabbed the man as he hit the ground alongside my SL, throwing him off. The next thing I saw was a flash, a single shot finding its mark and exploding the man's head into a spray of blood. "Fuck. Fuck," my squad leader screamed. "Motherfucker almost got us." I looked at him, trying to focus. He was shaken, but we couldn't afford to stop now. Bullets whizzed past us like angry bees, eager for our flesh. Finally, we reached the buildings where a CO was holed up. Their Humvees looked beat to hell, and there wasn't a single gun returning fire. "Let's go." Right there, the PSG barked, pointing to a building a few down from ours. I squinted. I could barely make out two machine gun barrels protruding from a window, one above the other. It was a two-story structure, and I could hear the rat-a-tat-tat of PKM machine guns cutting through the air. "Bang bang, go left," the PSG ordered. "Lifeline, to the right." Right. That was us, Lifeline Squad. It had a certain ring to it, though I'd originally suggested 911 Squad, but they all shot that idea down fast. Killer and Devil, with me. The platoon had a nickname for every squad, something that made things a little less bleak on the inside. We turned right as the chaos unfolded around us. Moving forward, we fought for every inch. On a normal day, it'd be a 5-minute walk. That day? It felt like hours. Thankfully, our path didn't hold too much resistance. We were close when the door beside us suddenly exploded open, and one of the guys caught the corner of it to the helmet. He stumbled, tripping backward, as an enemy soldier rushed out with something in his hand, tackling the guy in front of me. "Knife!" I screamed, grabbing the attacker by the arms. The enemy combatant kicked the downed soldier in the face, breaking his nose, before I managed to pull him up. His knife jabbed into my sappy plate, the impact sending me crashing to the ground. My head rang from the fall, and in a split second, the soldier behind me pistol-whipped the attacker, smashing his face in before putting 2 shots into his chest. This was war. No time for hesitation. I barely noticed the blood starting to trickle down my own cheek as we helped the injured soldier up. "Fuck me, that's broken, man," I said, assessing the damage from the door. I quickly tried to slow the bleeding. "Can you see?" my SL barked. He gave a thumbs up, a bloody smile spreading across his face despite the swelling. A tough bastard, no doubt. His face was turning purple, but there he was, smiling like a man who'd just won the lottery. We grouped up, waiting for the signal to storm the stronghold, with each squad surrounding it. Grenades flew in, explosions from within, followed by screams. The door was kicked in, and we entered, guns blazing. I was the last one inside, hanging back until the all clear came. "All clear," someone shouted after several minutes of firefights and chaos. I sprinted in, heart hammering in my chest. "Now what, Sarge?" I yelled over the gunfire. "Radio," the PSG shouted back. After what felt like an eternity of shouting into the handset, we finally got confirmation. The enemy was retreating deeper into the town. We had won this battle, but victory was still a long way off. I moved as fast as my tired legs could carry me, rushing to treat the wounded. It wasn't long before I found the body of a man I didn't recognize. Then I saw the patch. The medic. I knelt beside him, trembling hands gently placing his arms across his chest. "Fuck," I whispered. He'd taken a grenade blast to the chest, his jugular torn apart, his life extinguished in mere seconds. "He was a good fucking guy," someone said behind me. I looked up, meeting the eyes of an ACO sergeant. "I don't know him," I muttered. "Never seen him around." "Well, kid, you're from Bravo, huh?" His thick Arkansas accent rang out. "Yeah, sir." "Second platoon," I replied, my voice shaky. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Shit, kid, you're what, 12? Damn, they send M young these days," he said with a grin. 19, sir. First deployment. First combat, I said, feeling a little embarrassed. "Shit, you're alright, kid. You did good today." Our doc, hell, he was the bravest son of a bitch I knew. He paused, taking a drag from his cigarette. "You scared?" he asked after a moment. "Yeah. I'm fucking terrified, Sergeant," I confessed, the truth falling from my lips. He nodded. "Good. That'll keep you alive out here. Don't let it eat you up. You're their medic. You gotta run through hell to get your boys home." I just nodded, swallowing hard. "Doc. Get over here." My SL's voice pierced the moment. I gave the sergeant a quick nod and ran to the call. "Doc, casevacs on the way." "You good?" my SL asked, eyeing my injuries. I swallowed, my throat dry. Yeah, I'm good," I stuttered. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did fucking good today. You're not a newbie anymore. Keep it up, and we'll get home," he said with a rare smile. "Thanks, Sergeant." "Today fucking sucked," I replied with a grin of my own. He laughed, but I saw the weariness in his eyes. "We ain't been in the shit yet, document." Eventually, I found myself loading up the dead and the maimed onto the chopper, sitting with them until we reached the safety of the airfield. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. We had made it just in time for dinner. A fellow medic patched me up on the way back, giving me a thumbs up once I was good to go. Our first real combat in the heart of darkness hadn't gone well. At least, not for me. We were hailed as heroes, praised for our bravery, but the dead medic haunted me. Could have been me. It could have been. Was I ready for this? I had no answers. But in those moments of laughing with the guys, of joking through the exhaustion, and building trust, that's when I knew I could make it. We lost some good men that day, and I'll grieve for them as long as I live. The pain stays, even when it's out of your hands. But I made it out of hell, and I'm facing my demons head on. As for that town, we'd never fully secure it. It would haunt us until the day we left. That was the place that supplied the Taliban that would one day take my friend Mina's life. And no matter how hard we tried, it would never be ours to hold. As the helicopter lifted off from the valley, the night sky swallowing up the chaos below, my thoughts raced, weaving through the blurred memories of the day. The battlefield had been an unrelenting force, and the horror had yet to fully sink in. The noise, the explosions, the screams, every sound was etched in my mind. But now, there was a strange silence in the air, a void where the usual hum of the rotor blades and the muffled voices of the wounded filled the space. I leaned against the cold metal of the chopper's interior, my face throbbing with pain, but I didn't mind. It was a dull reminder of the chaos I had survived. The medic beside me worked methodically, tending to the smaller cuts and bruises I had sustained. He didn't say much, which suited me just fine. Silence was a luxury I couldn't afford too often in the field. The winding path of the helicopter seemed to stretch on forever. My mind drifted back to the man I had found lying on the ground, his body torn apart by a grenade. I couldn't shake the image of his lifeless body, a medic just like me. His uniform, his patch, the same as mine. But the circumstances were different. He hadn't made it. And yet, I had. Why? Why was I still here? I thought about the sergeant from a company, his thick Arkansas drawl still fresh in my ears. He had asked me if I was scared. Hell yes, I was scared. Terrified. But there was something about the way he said it, almost as if he wanted me to admit it. To embrace it. The fear wasn't weakness, he had said. It was survival. It would keep me sharp. Keep me alive. I could still hear his words echoing in my head. The chopper swayed gently, a faint sound of static crackling over the intercom. The medic working on me finished with a final tap on my bandages and stepped back. "All set, Doc," he said, his voice matter-of-fact. "You did good today. Don't let it mess with you." I didn't respond right away. I simply nodded, unsure of how to answer. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me with a cold, empty feeling in my chest. The pain from my wounds was real, but it was the emotional scars that were harder to deal with. Every step I had taken forward today had been a step into the unknown. The fear I had tried to suppress, the guilt gnawing at me for not being able to save everyone, the loss of the medic, it all lingered, just beneath the surface. The flight was longer than I expected, the hum of the chopper lulling me into a semi-conscious state. I couldn't tell if it was hours or minutes before we finally touched down at the forward operating base. The bright lights from the hangars and the movement of soldiers on the ground blurred together. I climbed off the chopper, my body stiff and aching. I didn't realize how badly I needed rest until I saw the cot waiting for me. But sleep wasn't something I could afford. I had seen too much today to simply close my eyes and forget. I knew what the next few weeks would be like, haunting memories, the relentless tension, the constant threat. But for tonight, I would take what little peace I could find. I made my way to the medic tent, my mind racing despite my exhaustion. As I entered, I saw a few of the other medics gathered around, cleaning up from their own shifts. They greeted me with silent nods and murmurs of acknowledgement, their faces tired, worn by the same horrors we all faced. I found an empty cot in the corner and dropped onto it, unstrapping my gear and setting it aside. It felt good to finally take a moment to breathe, to feel the weight of the day slip off my shoulders. But it wasn't long before the familiar feeling of unease crept back in. I tried to shut my eyes, but the images of the battlefield kept playing on loop. I couldn't get the face of the medic out of my head. His body, so lifeless. His blood staining the dirt. It wasn't supposed to be him. It should have been someone else. But that's the thing about war. You don't get to choose. Everyone is a target. Everyone is expendable. It was then that the voice of my squad leader, Sarge, echoed in my mind. "You did good today, document. You're not new anymore. Keep that up, and we'll get home." I clenched my fists, the familiar sting of frustration rising in my chest. We might have gotten through today, but there was always tomorrow. The next mission. The next battle. And I wasn't so sure we were going to make it through all of them. I was still here, still alive, but for how long? And at what cost? The door to the medic tent opened, and one of the other medics entered. She was holding a clipboard, looking around the room. When she saw me, she made her way over, a concerned look crossing her face. "Hey, Doc," she said quietly. How are you holding up? I wanted to say I was fine. That everything was okay. But I couldn't. She saw right through me, and I wasn't in the mood to lie. I'll be alright, I replied, my voice hoarse. Just need to catch my breath. She nodded but didn't leave. Instead, she sat down on the cot beside mine, pulling her hair back into a ponytail. The silence between us stretched on for a moment, comfortable in its own way. You did good today, too, I added, breaking the quiet. You were right there with us, keeping it together. She gave a small, tired smile. Thanks, document. You know we don't get to pick the day we're gonna be called to action. But we're all in it together, right? I looked at her, her words hanging in the air. In that moment, I realized she was right. We might not be able to control when or where the next fight would happen, but we could control how we faced it. Together. And for the first time that day, I allowed myself to let out a breath. The weight on my shoulders didn't disappear, but it felt a little lighter. There was still so much more to come, so much more we had to face. But I wasn't alone. And as long as we stood together, we would find a way to make it through. The night stretched on, the quiet hum of the camp outside a soft reminder of the world beyond the tent. I closed my eyes once more, but this time, I didn't fight the sleep that overtook me.